As the days have been getting shorter, and we're getting ready to enter a time change, if you can believe it. I'm not ready for that. It's made me connect with Bartimaeus, because there are times now where you want to be outside and you just can't see because it's dark. Well, it reminded me of this one time where I was riding my bike to and from church last year, and Tom was doing the same thing but into the city. So he'd ride his bike, get on BART, go to the city. And it became a time where I missed it was just getting darker and darker, and I had so much I wanted to do that I decided at that point I would just abandon the bike and take an Uber home or walk home. But my husband called me, and he said, hey, same things happened to me. I'm going to try to get out of the city. I think we can navigate it together. Now, I don't know if you've ever seen the drivers in Walnut Creek. We didn't want to go that pathway. We wanted to go on the trails. And this was, I guess I just never had been on the trails as the sun has set. What happens on the trails when the sun has set? It's really dark because there's no lamps or lights, nothing. It's just really, really dark. And there's this point, so Tom and I are on bikes, and I have a light on my bike, and flashing lights everywhere. But you can't see forward, and my light started to fall off my bike, so I grabbed it. So I was able to grab it, and I'm holding the light in place. Tom's behind me. So I'm holding the light, trying to ride the bike, and I can't see anything at all. And there's this junction when we go through Civic Park to the Iron Horse Trail where I take a left, and it's less than a mile. That's why we thought we could do this. Well, we did it. Clearly, I'm standing here. Anyway, there's this point where that intersection happens. It's kind of a scary point because you have traffic that you may not see. There's campers in the area, and there are dogs in the area. So sometimes those campers have dogs too. So I was so concerned about not being able to see that if someone stepped out into the pathway, it would just not be a good thing. Well, we made it, thank goodness, with our one little narrow beam all the way there. But it's really disorienting to be in the dark, isn't it? It's incredibly disorienting. And so it really made me connect with Bartimaeus, who is blind, and not only blind, but a beggar and blind. So he's standing on the side of the road, and he can only hear what is coming and going. And depending on the day, it's either feast or famine. Who he encounters is either kind or cruel. It's very chaotic and in the moment. And here, he hears Jesus. And he knows that Jesus is so much more than just a healer. He says, Son of David. That's the messianic title. He's not just calling any old healer to come and heal him. He sees Jesus for who Jesus is. Now, up to this point, the disciples haven't figured that out. And here we have a blind man on the pathway who sees Jesus fully and says, Son of David, come and heal me. He's not asking for just a healing. He's asking for that transformation that a Messiah would give, that liberation that a Messiah would give. He sees Jesus. What is it about Bartimaeus that allows him to see Jesus at that moment? In this chapter of 10, of Mark 10, there are several people who come and encounter Jesus. This is like the last story of all these encounters. There's actually 5 different stories of encounters, ranging from the Pharisees to the rich man to the children to the 2 disciples who were asking Jesus who should be on his left and right from last Sunday. All these people, the marginalized, the privileged, the curious, the poor. And those who encountered Jesus and had the transformation, I bet you can guess who it was. It's those who are poor and marginalized who can get and gain that transformation that Jesus is asking for. What is it about that? If you remember, a few weeks ago, we had a very rich man who was asking Jesus, how do you get abundant life? And he says, you have to sell everything you own. And the man went away just disheartened. I think what's happening here is that when people are privileged, we get a little isolated and separated from our needs. And I think that just happens as a natural inclination of being human. The more privileged we come, the more we have an ability to separate ourselves from the chaos of the world, right? But we all know that no matter how privileged you are, life is chaos sometimes, and we definitely get hit by it. But I think Bartimaeus and those who reach Jesus are the ones who are on the margins. Those are the ones who know and see clearly the transformation they need in their lives. So as privileged people, we have to think about the times in our lives when we don't know what's going to happen the next day. Major incidences of grief, or maybe a transition into a new job, or maybe a blessing of a new child. All of those moments are those moments where we kind of go, I don't know what's going to happen from one day to the next. What does tomorrow look like? Well, we'll see tomorrow. Anybody have an experience like that? Right? It's in those moments where we're clear on what we need, physically and mentally and spiritually. The comfort and the grace and love that God gives, that's what we desperately need in those moments. And I would actually argue that we are kind of in one of those moments now. Have you ever been, in the past couple of days or maybe weeks, living with some fear or anxiety or dread or excitement, I don't know, about what is to come in the next couple of weeks? Raise your hand if you know what I'm talking about. All right, the fact that we're all raising our hands means that we all know that this election is bringing forward lots of anxiety and fear, that we don't, past that point, know what our world might look like. Now, I, in connection with Helene, have had another moment where I feel like I'm not sure what is from one day to the next, just in my basic connection of my sister losing so much in Asheville. That hurricane certainly brought us into a situation of like, well, we're not sure what we're going to get from one day to the next, but let's see what tomorrow brings. And we're so thankful we still have each other. It's in those moments where we see God with clarity, or at least our needs with clarity. What our story is telling us is that just like Bartimaeus, in the fog, in the blindness, in the dark, who comes to Bartimaeus? Jesus does. That we have a God that is there, even if we don't see it. We just know it. And we get signs of it because as disciples, in those moments of chaos and fear, we're called to connect and love and help, right? So we see those signs all the time from our fellow disciples of God's love and presence. I have some signs of God's love and presence in these past few weeks. My sister yesterday, she texted me. She was so excited. She has an apartment in Asheville and a home in Old Fort that had been flooded out entirely. And she was excited because she was going to Old Fort to muck out the house. This is exciting because access has been such an issue, and the stream is low enough that they can now walk across the stream to get to the house and start the real work. Well, when they arrived at the house, lo and behold, was a footbridge. Now, this is a private access point. It's not a public access point. Somebody had created a footbridge. And when she asked our neighbors about it, the builders were still in the neighborhood. They were roving veterans. A group of roving veterans was going from community to community, asking the community what they need and building things like footbridges so that my sister can get to her house. When she got to her house, on the porch was a generator. Where'd that come from? Right? Here in Walnut Creek, you all, yesterday we hosted a funeral for a new member of our church. We hosted this funeral because she unfortunately came to us right before the pandemic started. And then after the pandemic, her husband got sick, and she was never able to really re-embrace into another church community. What this church did was surround her and support her in celebrating her husband yesterday. We had parishioners who read the prayers of the people. We had parishioners who acted as ushers. We had parishioners who ran the AV equipment. We had parishioners who stood and did the Eucharistic minister job, the lamb. When I went around from table to table during the reception, all I could hear was her thankfulness from her community that we had embraced her. That so many of her friends have traveled from so far, that we are a community that had brought welcome in the light of a very hard time. And the third thing that I saw this past weekend, is that yesterday we celebrated the general convention. We celebrated convention, the diocesan convention, when all the churches from our areas get together. And it led such a joyous spirit of how we're going to move forward in this challenging time, not in a who's going to do what mode, but in a what are we going to do together mode. That we felt embraced and loved and cared for, and we did the embracing and loving and caring for each other. In this time of anxiety and fear, let us act knowing in what we know that God is near. Let us see clearly what our call is in those moments, to love and to love generously, to share God's love with everyone we can. Let us be not just a little beam on the pathway, but this massive light in Walnut Creek. Let us be roving bands of St. Paul's Christians out into the world, bringing that joy and love to those places that need it the most. Amen.